15th. The West Virginia Mountaineers preseason power ranking of 15th. Are you serious? Well, today, the man who wrote that article and who ranked West Virginia 15th is going to explain himself. We're bringing on none other than Mr. Shehan Jeyarajah, who writes for CBS Sports. We're going to ask him to explain himself and exactly why he put West Virginia where they did. Shehan, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking time out of your day. Before we dig into it, man, can you explain, because I think sometimes there's some confusion about what a power ranking actually is, right, versus a rating or a AP poll or whatever. So explain a power ranking first for those in the audience who may not understand the difference.
Yeah, it's a mix of factors, right? Like this isn't just hey, this is how I think they're gonna go, 1 to 16 next year. Certainly that's a factor in it, but some of it has to do with what they're coming off of. For me, especially when I'm looking at a power ranking, power rating, that sort of thing, like it really does matter to me a lot what you bring back, just because again we don't know at this point how any of this is going to go. Now as we get into spring camp, into summer, into fall, we're going to learn more about, hey, this kid's really flashing at defensive lineman, this kid's really flashing at wide receiver, but like we don't even have that at this point, right? So I got a lot of grief actually for the team I ranked 16th, which was Iowa State. And honestly, I don't think Iowa State's going to finish last in the Big 12, but like, what are you pointing to on that team to say that you feel good about? Because we just don't know at this point. New staff, new players, everything. And, West Virginia is in an interesting position, right? Because they ended up obviously bringing in so many new players. And I mean, I'll be upfront about that. Like for me, that does matter. I think that when you're power ranking teams, especially, like having that baseline, I think really is important. And, for West Virginia, again, there's a lot of upside and there's not necessarily a high floor though at the same time.
Yeah, makes sense. So when you look at West Virginia, though, obviously you mentioned it, you're basing a lot of it on what they're bringing back. Did you look at the talent level of the players they brought in versus what left? Did you take a look at that as well, other than just the numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And and the other thing too was like I really liked Rich Rodriguez's recruiting class that he brought in from high school, right? I mean, you look at some of the level of talent. I think they had 2 top 150 kids coming in, like some really, really talented players. Kevin Brown, right, is the kid who flipped from Penn State. Like that's a dude who I think could be starting by the end of the year if some things break right? But same deal, right? I think that you look at what they're doing. I mean, they are really committing themselves to youth and kind of figuring out who those studs are going to be, right? And so you look at the overall talent level. I think that the talent level of year 2's roster is going to be notably higher than year 1, but it might also be a much younger roster that's earlier in its development cycle than even what you saw in year 1. So no, I mean, and look, I'll point out too, right? Like I think that a comparison that I'll make is a team that I had middle of the pack was Oklahoma State, who also is replacing a whole bunch of everybody, right? But they have, in my mind, a little bit more of a baseline because they're an older roster that you're transferring in. Obviously, 17 guys coming from North Texas as well, kind of maintaining that a little bit. And so, like, it's not necessarily just the fact that it's a new roster or that it's anything like that, again, because I think that the talent level has taken a step up, but I also think that the youth of the roster could come into play as well.
And I glad you pointed that out, because that's something I've cautioned our fans to be a little bit more cautiously optimistic. A lot of as I'm a fan show, so us fans, we tend to get really excited about everything, right? But when you look at, I say, hey, look, last year West Virginia brought in 80 plus guys that were mostly upperclassmen, but a lot of them turned out to not be very good players. This year we're bringing in a lot of more talent, which fans are excited about. But I'm like, look, 40% of the roster approximately is going to be freshmen or redshirt freshmen. Most of those guys won't play this year. And if they do, there's going to be some growing pains, right? So I do think that's something that we need to take into account is the youth. So I thank you for explaining that. And I didn't really have my reaction to your ranking was, hey, I would not have put West Virginia in the top half of the league. I probably would have had them more in the 11 to 12 range, probably. So, still not that much difference. But the Oklahoma State comparison to me was the most ironic one. But I think you laid it out pretty well Is the fact that Eric Morris at Oklahoma State's bringing in so many players from his old stomping grounds at North Texas, was that one of the reasons you put them at number 8?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a huge part of it. Obviously, when you look at their offense, at least at the skill positions, right? Like they have guys that are pretty much locks to be top 5 in the league at their position, right? Caleb Hawkins coming in at running back. Drew Messmaker will obviously see how he translates to this next level, but it just creates a different kind of baseline. I think
Mhm.
the obvious, and you don't want to overdo this comp, but like is the Indiana thing with Kurt Signetti, right? Where he brings in kind of a ready-made, mostly upperclassmen roster from James Madison to Indiana, and a team, by the way, that went, of course, 11-1 in his final season as well at James Madison. That to me is, again, I'm not going to say it's an equally clean comp because obviously that's a once in a generation type thing, but I
Right.
think it does set a little bit more of a floor when you bring in a ready-made very good roster. I mean, I even, again, to go back to the Iowa State point, right? I had people say, well, the Iowa State's bringing in 15 guys, I think it is, from Washington State.
Mhm.
But like the quality of those two teams, right? I mean, North Texas was on the edge of the playoff, and
Right.
Washington State was a very nice developmental story, right? And so I think that that's a big part of it. And the other thing too is like I think that one thing that I really have pointed out to people who have asked me about this power ranking is that I think that one other thing that people are going to have to get used to is that we're used to last place, second to last place being like 2015 Kansas, right? Like we're used to
Right.
it being like
Yeah.
absolutely terrible, horrendous, awful football going in no direction. I mean, I think that every team in the league this year, if some things break right for them, could make a bowl game,
Yeah.
like, and some won't just because of the math, right? But like, I think that, you know, Iowa State's upside is making a bowl game. West Virginia's upside is making a bowl game. Colorado's upside is making a bowl game. Baylor's upside, like, you go through and through and through, like, again, it's like we talk about this in the context of college basketball, right? Where it's like, out of, 16 Big 12 teams, it's like 14 are in the top 100 in net or Ken Palm, right?
Mhm.
That's going to kind of be what the Big 12 is right now, is that, teams that 5 years ago maybe would have been 6-win teams are just going to be 4-win teams because of just the math and the quality of competition right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, well said. One thing though about West, and I don't know how much, again, you seem like you dug pretty deep into this, so I respect that, by the way. Because sometimes I look at it because me only covering one team, I'm focused in on that one team.
Sure.
Whereas you and your national media folks are covering the whole sport. Sometimes I sit and wonder, okay, how much time do they actually have to dig into these individual teams, right? Sounds like you did your homework. But one of the things that some fans are pointing out about West Virginia this year is, and I think it's important, how much difference will it make? We'll see. But last year, Rich Rod had like about half of the roster that played in the fall was not there for spring camp
Sure.
because he brought in a ton of portal guys after spring ball was over in that second portal window. Well, this year, there is no second portal window. And one of the things he focused on this year was he wanted to make sure he recruited guys who could get there for spring camp. So, like 80-90% of the roster is there now, going through spring ball, and winter workouts, summer workouts, the whole bit. How much difference do you think that could make in their ability to be maybe exceeding those expectations?
Yeah, I think it's big. I'll say two things on this. One is, I will say most teams, right, are trying to get guys here for spring now, right? It's a
Mhm.
little bit less of an advantage as it used to be, but
Okay.
I think that what you kind of point to is that it was a disadvantage last year for West Virginia with the
Yeah.
way they started the year. I think that that disadvantage will be certainly lessened
Mhm.
in 2026. So no, I think that having the roster there is a big deal. I think the other thing too, and I mean, again, we're talking obviously about 2026 when we talk about this power ranking. Like, I think that when you look at this staff, I think that they've understood something about college football right now, which is that actually, in some ways, the biggest inefficiency right now in college football is developmental players and is guys who you're recruiting from high school
Mhm.
and you're keeping around. I remember talking to a general manager a couple months ago, and one thing that he talked about is like in this era, what you are looking for above everything else is you're finding a way to get a bargain. Because while, obviously not every team in practice is working with the same cap, every team is working with the cap, right? So if you have $2 million to play with, Well, how are you maximizing that $2 million?
Mhm.
And the reality is, if you develop a kid over 2 or 3 years, he's going to be cheaper for you to keep than he is going to be for you to add,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that when I look at this West Virginia team, again, they brought in a huge class last year. They figured out, what do we want to keep, what do we want to get rid of in 2026, and I
Mhm.
think that they did a good job of that. And now in the second class, like we talked about, I think it's a much more talented class than what 2025 was, and I think it's going to be kind of the same deal. Let's figure out, the top, you know top 60% of the roster. We'll prioritize keeping them. We'll shuffle out the 40%, and we'll do this over again. So,
Mhm.
again, this is something that I think, when you bring in guys who are going to be here for the spring, they have more time to develop. I think that this staff is going to be a developmental staff. So I was worried whenever Rich Rod was hired, right, that it was going to be, full 2005. I'm trying to, beat their butts every single
Mhm.
day, because I feel like I have 4 years with them. I don't think it's been quite that. I think that it's been a little bit more clear eyed than that.
Yeah.
But, I think that having so many of these guys here from a development perspective, from a team culture perspective, I mean, it's definitely something that will pay off in the fall. And again, by the time that the end of spring ball comes around, we'll have a little bit more clarity on what that means for the guys who showed up here.
Right. Yeah. Great point. What did you think about West Virginia? I'm going to switch gears and talk
Yeah.
specific guys here or positions. What do you think about you mentioned all the North Texas guys coming uh, to Oklahoma State, and you mentioned the running back and the quarterback. What do you think about Cam Cook coming over from Jacksonville State to West Virginia, and the impact he could potentially have?
Yeah, no, he's an exciting player. Obviously we saw the production that he had last year at Jacksonville State. He held up pretty well against high level competition in the few chances that he got. Another thing too, I'm sure West Virginia fans are very aware of this, but he was a borderline blue chip kid when he came to TCU. So like this isn't the story of a kid who didn't have very good measurables
Mhm.
who then kind of figured some stuff out. Like Cam Cook is the real deal from a power conference talent perspective. So I think he's going to be a fantastic fit. I was curious too, right? I mean, obviously, one of the most unfortunate things that happened last year was the loss of Jaheim White
Oh,
earlier
yeah.
in the
Yeah.
year. I was really hoping he'd stick around. I also get why he wanted to move on. um, I think that Cam Cook is exactly the kind of player who's going to fit this offense very well, right? Somebody who has, can hit that top end speed, makes
Mhm.
really good cuts and decisions. Again, I expect that the read game is always going to be a big factor in Rich Rod's offense, and he's somebody who I think can execute that at a high level. So, look, I think the big thing is, with the amount that they run the ball, obviously they're going to need to have depth too. But I think that to have that kind of guy at the top, like it just changes the way that teams have to defend West Virginia.
Right. What about what about Michael Hawkins Jr. at quarterback? Do you think he has a chance to come in and win the job day one?
Yeah, this was a really interesting ad to me from Oklahoma. So for people who aren't super familiar with the story, he comes up, he goes to Oklahoma, he's backing up Jackson Arnold back in 2024, kind of gets thrust into action, and just to be frank, right, especially for the kind of offense that they were trying to run, like a spread passing offense. He just wasn't ready as yet. I think that's going to be a lot less of a concern coming into an offense like this at West Virginia. That again, has the ability to get very run based, and obviously he'll continue to develop as a passer as well. It's interesting though, because I really liked what I saw from Scotty Fox back there too. I
Mhm.
thought that he kind of looked like one of those diamonds in the rough that Rich Rod has had such a good time finding over the years. But and I talked to one or two people, kind of in the West Virginia orbit, and what they kind of said was this, right? Is that especially early on, especially when the trenches are still developing, like the offense means that guys are probably going to get hurt, right? Like that quarterbacks are probably going to go down over the
Mhm.
course of the season, and you need to have more than one or two guys. Now you don't have to have five guys or whatever it was last year
Yeah.
for West Virginia, but I think that one, I expect it to be a very open competition.
Mhm.
Like I think that Hawkins is clearly talented enough to come in and challenge whoever is there. But two, I think that we will probably see both Scotty Fox and Michael Hawkins at different times. I'll be curious to see again if who wins the job out of camp. Again, but Hawkins has especially the athletic upside to do it. I think that what'll be interesting to see is we saw late in the year Scotty Fox's like playmaking as a passer. Like
Mhm.
that's something that's tough to teach, right? Like that
Yep.
that's the sort of thing that you just either have it or you don't. We're going to kind of figure out whether Michael Hawkins has that. And I think that also, again, to go back to it, the development of the offensive line, the development of the receivers, how much structure they're able to play within might also play a factor as well into who ends up winning the job out of camp.
Agree. Yeah, fans were really high on Scotty Fox, especially at the end of the year. Early in the season, things didn't look as good. He came in against Pitt through those 2 picks, but man, he came on late in the year and really learned from those mistakes. And Rich Rod's not one to guarantee anybody anything, right? He's not going to guarantee anybody playing time, starting jobs, any of that. So, I agree with you. I think it'll be a very good competition, and I think either guy has the capability of winning the job. But as far as Jaheim goes, yeah, losing him was kind of a shock, I think, to most West Virginia fans because he had been kind of hinting on social media that he was coming back. But for whatever reason, I guess whether it was a mutual decision or what, he decided it was best to move on. But and you probably know, but he's joining Neil Brown in North Texas. Speaking of that, West Virginia fans, I don't know how much you follow our social media, but West Virginia fans, for the most part, liked Neil Brown as a person and actually hated that things didn't work out because he seemed to do everything the right way, just was not winning enough games. So a lot of West Virginia fans are actually pulling for him to succeed at North Texas. It's not an animosity type deal. Do you think he's going to be able to keep that train rolling down there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's actually my neck of the woods. I live in the DFW area, so I'll be watching
Mm-hmm.
them very closely. It's interesting, right? I think that when he came into West Virginia, it seemed to check a lot of boxes, right? He's obviously, sort of fun, dynamic offense historically at Troy. You kind of feel like, okay, Troy was a rural school, like maybe West Virginia, you can find some inroads there. But I think there's also the aspect of like, yeah, the kids that you have the closest access to in that area, maybe aren't the same as kind of the air raid kids that he's used to seeing more down in the South. And, he obviously came through the Kentucky, Hal Mummy, Mike Leach, all that system, right? So I think that this should be a really natural fit for him going to North Texas. For him, of course, getting back to, he was offense coordinator at Texas Tech for a while. He obviously, again, has spent a lot of his career in the South. And you're going to have guys, or you're going to have access to guys who I think fit what he wants to do offensively in a really high way. I feel like there was an aspect at West Virginia where, again, he obviously has had successful offenses over the year, but running kind of air raid spread stuff wasn't necessarily a mismatch or disadvantage, that he could create in the Big 12, right? This is a conference that everybody has run it. Everybody has those concepts in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he struggled to kind of adjust to, well, sometimes his best players were his running back. Sometimes his best players were his offensive linemen. So we got to completely, I think that there was some conflict in that. Well,
Right.
being back down in Texas, like you're going to have access to receivers at a
Mm-hmm.
super high level. You're going to have access to quarterbacks. All of them are going to have run air raid stuff from the time that they were 12 years old. And so I think it has a chance to be a really good fit. It's interesting, right? We're seeing with some of these high level G5 jobs, I guess G6 now jobs,
Mm-hmm.
we're getting some of the retreads, right? Billy Napier at James Madison, Neil Brown at North Texas. But I think that as long as they're kind of motivated coming in and they understand what the upside is, and by the way, you can make the college football playoff if you take one
Yep.
of these jobs. I think that there's a really good possibility that this works out for him.
Yeah. Can you give me one player? We've talked about Kevin Brown. We've talked about Cam Cook. We've talked about the quarterbacks. Is there another player on the West Virginia roster that you think might be, ready to break out in 26, or maybe the fans should be on the lookout for in 26?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that the development that they've had in the trenches is definitely something that stands apart, just kind of as a unit.
Mm-hmm.
I really do feel like Hawkins is going to be a player that they use a lot in a lot of different ways, whether or not he's the starting quarterback. Again, not that they're going to necessarily have to like rotate full time, but there are ways to use both those quarterbacks at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, depending
Right.
on who obviously ends up being the starter. I mean, again, both are super athletic guys, both throw the ball at a really high level, both of them can run run at a really high level. So, I think that regardless of what kind of comes next, like I expect both those guys to be very involved in that rotation.
What do you think about Rick Trickett coming back?
Yeah, I mean that's the name, right?
Mhm.
Coming back there. I think it's good, right? I mean, I think that Rich Rod has done a really good job of finding people who are from the West Virginia world, right? To kind of like can I have used the phrase like translate to the young
Mhm.
guys, right?
Great
And
way to
people
put it.
who understand what this place is, who
Yep.
understand how Rich Rod does things, um, but also again, like have their own style to be able to again kind of put their own spin on things,
Mhm.
kind of say like, hey, you know what, like Rich Rod was, was kind of obviously it was kind of rough to deal with today, but like this is what he's trying to get across, right?
Yep.
And so I think that bringing in some of these familiar faces is a really good deal for just trying to again take over a roster that is going to have a whole lot of new faces. And I think that any opportunity you have to provide solid leadership is a good thing to do.
Yep. And then, final question for you, Shehan. Just college football in general. Do you think we look at what Kurt Cignetti did in Indiana? You look at teams like a West Virginia. You look at just really any team out there who's not a quote unquote blue blood, right?
Yeah.
Do you think the tide is changing and that those teams are now going to have more of a chance to win, or do you think what Kurt Cignetti's doing is just an anomaly and he's just that good?
Well, let's be clear, right? Kurt Cignetti is just that good. It is going to be a little bit of an anomaly, right?
Mhm.
But I do think that let's even put aside, just Indiana this year, right? Ohio State obviously is one of the blue bloods of college football, and
Mhm.
Michigan is a blue blood, even though obviously they don't necessarily recruit the same exact way. But the thing I'd point to is that I think that right now we are moving away from the one way of doing things, I guess I'd say,
Mhm.
right? For the last 15 years, it's been who can run the Nick Saban model the best. And that's player acquisition, that's long term development, that's focusing on stars, that's focusing on NFL draft outputs. The comparison that I've made is that the last college basketball team to be one and done driven is 2015 Duke. And ever since then, having second and third year guys who have been in your program and understand how you do things is actually a pretty big advantage compared to constantly churning talent. I think that that's actually the biggest part of the reason that the SEC is having some issues, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think that it is a player acquisition league, and the development, I think, in some ways has fallen by the wayside. And I think that that creates opportunities for teams that are able to identify well, keep guys around. By the way, you don't have to just recruit them out of high school. You can recruit them as transfers with 3 years left.
Right.
That's also a
Which
part
is
of the equation.
yeah, back to what West Virginia's
100%.
doing now versus
Yeah.
what they did a year ago. Yeah.
No, and that's why I kind of mentioned, like, I feel
Yeah.
like Rich Rodriguez understands the headwinds of where things are going right now.
Mhm.
And again, look, obviously you have to hit a certain level of talent. Obviously, you have to hit a certain level of production. Obviously, you have to, produce a certain amount of NFL players to get into the national title mix. But I think that it is going to democratize the competition in a way that I think that a lot of people don't expect. And I think that because look, we're obviously talking about Indiana, but like the other piece of it too is that the last three national runners up are Notre Dame, are Miami, who obviously they transfer guys in on top, but like their lines are all
Mhm.
homegrown kids. I mean, Akeem Mesidor has been there for 3 years or whatever at this point, and Washington, who is also a multi-year rebuild, right? And so I think that uh, I think that there's going to be more put on what is your timeline? Can you keep guys for multiple years? Can you
Mhm.
identify your core? Can you hit on a few transfers to kind of top things off? And also like yeah, there's a huge part of it that's just and also can you get a little lucky, right? Can
Yep.
you get a couple bounces to go your way and give yourself a chance?
Yeah.
But I think that I think that the way that this is going to work long term has changed a lot. Again, the idea, especially in a world where we're paying players, like there is not incentive for a top 50 player to sit on the bench for 3 years anymore.
Mhm.
So if you can find the top 350 player who you have for 3 years, that might actually end up working out better long term than landing the biggest of the big fish.
Yeah, and Neil Brown was trying that too, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, either he missed on guys or and just to be honest, West Virginia was not able to retain some of their
yeah,
top guys over the years. They were leaving for more money. Akeem Mesidor is a perfect example of that.
yeah,
More money or more opportunity, whatever he felt he was getting at Miami, right? I mean, he was getting snaps at West Virginia, so that wasn't an issue.
yeah,
But so the key is, can Rich Rod do a better job retaining the guys, like the huge recruiting class? Can he retain the majority of those kids? Because if he can't, and this is what I've been preaching, if we're getting 70 to 80 players again in 2027, we got a problem.
yeah.
It's okay this year because
Yes.
he realized what he did last year didn't work, so he's having to rethink it. And plus, he came in late. He didn't really have time to recruit a full class, right? He had to kind of take what he could get. With him being able to recruit a full class, utilize his strategy, knows what he's wanting to do and the kind of guys he's wanting to get. If we're replacing 80, 70, 80 players again, it's going to be a major problem, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, 100%. And yeah, and I think that again, that's a long term strategy, right?
Mhm.
Is you bring in this giant class, you keep the 20 to 30% that you like, you bring in another giant class, and hopefully by between those two, right, you got a
Mhm.
couple of you got 70% of a roster set in place,
Yep.
and then you just have to work around the edges. But
Right.
again, it's much easier said than done.
Right.
But that's also it was a different world, it was a different time, it was a different strategy per se. But like that's how all of Rich Rod's great rosters have been built, right? That's what he did at Jacksonville State. That's what he did at Arizona. That's what he
Mhm.
did, obviously, the first time around at West Virginia. So
Yep.
it's harder to retain than it's ever been, but you can also do it as
You
well.
can do it. And I think there are teams out there. There are teams in the Big 12. Kansas does a great job retaining guys. Texas Tech does a pretty. Regardless of what you want to say about the money they
Yeah.
spend, they retain most of their players. They just spend big on the ones they do bring in,
Yeah.
and they're able to go out and get top guys now at those positions.
The thing that I always kind of pointed to, right, is like with Texas Tech is people point to the guys that they brought in, but like they were able to bring in guys on the top because the second and third tier guys were already there,
Yep.
right? And by the way, at the positions where they weren't there, like that's where they struggled. Offensive line was an issue for them last
Mhm.
year. That's why they got shut out. Well, now they got guys who have been multiple years in the program, and they're going to hope that that pays off long term. So
Yep.
again, I mean, I think that like it's very easy to kind of look at all of this as just pure portal combat, and that it's all just who pays the most and who do you bring in. But like you got to have a core there, especially in the trenches. And that's, I think, when you have a group that is mostly juniors and mostly seniors, that's going to be the year where you really need to pounce.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, Shehan, thanks again, man. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it. Everybody. Please go check out Shehan's work over at cbssports.com. Does great stuff over there. Did a really good piece on Cody Campbell at Texas Tech. Uh, I'm sure you spent a lot of time on that one. Uh, so go check it out. And of course, the power rankings, which I've done a video on already and left a link to. I'll leave another link here. Shehan, anything you want to tell the audience as far as what you might be working on next?
No, we're heading into the off season, so
Mhm.
gonna try to figure out our, sort of the next big project that
Right.
we're working on. But this time of year never stops, right? I'll tell you what. You mentioned, of course, kind of the deep dive and research going into it. I had somebody ask me for the power rankings, did you review depth charts? I'm like, if you got any depth charts to share with me, man, like I would love to see a depth chart. Ain't nobody got a depth chart
No.
right now.
And if
It's
they do, they're not accurate. I guarantee it.
100%. I mean, even I look. You even asked me like, who are some of the guys at West Virginia that might stand out? Man, I got to go look back at that roster again and
Well,
figure
and
out
when they're all new every year, it's hard. I mean, I
exactly.
struggle to track it. I mean,
Yeah,
I cover the team daily, and I'm like, my
100%,
gosh, I can't keep. I forget names. I'm like, how am I supposed to remember 80 names,
100%.
brand
It's
new names?
and
It's
again, it
gosh,
won't always be like this, but right now it's like this.
yeah, it's crazy. It's kind of fun at times because
Yeah,
sometimes you got to embrace the chaos and just enjoy it. But man, it doesn't make life easy.
100%.
All right, Shehan. Hey, thank you again, and everybody, please go check out his work. Shehan, you have a great day, and thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.